When Sophia Delacroix became New Orleans' most sought-after wedding florist, brides trusted her to create their dream ceremonies. But when her obsession with perfection and buried family secrets consumed her, she began using poisonous flowers and botanical toxins to murder clients who threatened to expose her dark past, turning beautiful bouquets into instruments of death. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now let's get back to the story. The humid New Orleans afternoon air hung heavy with the scent of magnolias and jasmine as Sophia Delacroix arranged the final stems of her latest bridal bouquet at Bayou Blooms, the exclusive French Quarter flower shop that had become the city's premier destination for luxury wedding arrangements and botanical artistry. At 36 years old, Sophia had established herself as New Orleans' most innovative and sought-after floral designer, specializing in elaborate wedding decorations that incorporated rare tropical flowers, heirloom garden varieties, and exotic plants that she cultivated in her private greenhouse behind the historic Creole mansion that housed her business. Sophia's reputation extended far beyond New Orleans, attracting wealthy clients from across the South who were willing to pay premium prices for her artistic vision and her ability to create wedding environments that captured the romantic mystique of Louisiana's plantation heritage while incorporating modern luxury and botanical sophistication. Her client roster included tech executives planning destination weddings, entertainment industry celebrities seeking privacy for intimate ceremonies, and old-money Southern families who valued both tradition and artistic excellence in their most important celebrations. The interior of Bayou Blooms reflected Sophia's sophisticated aesthetic and deep knowledge of botanical history, featuring antique wrought iron displays, hand-painted tiles imported from France, and rare specimen plants that she had collected during travels to botanical gardens and private estates throughout Europe and the Caribbean. Her consultation room was adorned with photographs of her most spectacular wedding creations, testimonials from grateful brides, and certificates recognizing her expertise in horticulture and floral design from prestigious institutions worldwide. But beneath Sophia's artistic reputation lay a dangerous obsession with perfection and a deadly family secret that had driven her to systematically murder clients who discovered her criminal past or threatened to interfere with her carefully constructed new identity. "Good afternoon, Sophia," said Isabella Blackwood, her 3 o'clock appointment, and a 28-year-old attorney whose engagement to prominent businessman Marcus Chen had made their upcoming wedding one of New Orleans' most anticipated social events of the season. Isabella had specifically requested Sophia's services after seeing her work featured in prestigious bridal magazines, and she was willing to pay over $50,000 for the elaborate floral arrangements that would transform the historic St. Louis Cathedral into a botanical paradise. "Good afternoon, Isabella," Sophia replied, with the refined elegance and subtle French accent that had made her legendary among New Orleans' wedding-obsessed elite who viewed her as both artist and cultural curator, capable of creating ceremonies that honored the city's romantic heritage. "I've been developing some extraordinary concepts for your cathedral ceremony using rare orchids from my private collection and heirloom roses that have been cultivated in Louisiana for over 2 centuries. Your wedding will be a masterpiece of botanical artistry that captures the eternal beauty of love itself." Isabella had become Sophia's most dangerous client, not because of her demanding personality or high expectations, but because of her legal background and her growing suspicions about inconsistencies in Sophia's personal history and business practices. As an attorney specializing in fraud investigation, Isabella had begun noticing discrepancies in Sophia's credentials and had started conducting background research that threatened to expose the criminal identity Sophia had been hiding for over 8 years. What Isabella didn't know was that Sophia had been systematically murdering clients who discovered her true identity as a convicted killer who had escaped from prison and created a new life using forged documents and stolen credentials. Sophia's transformation from escaped convict to celebrated florist had begun 8 years earlier when she had fled from Louisiana State Penitentiary, where she had been serving a life sentence for murdering her abusive stepfather with a combination of poisonous plants from his own garden. Born Sophia Tran, She had grown up in an impoverished household where her mother's second husband had subjected both of them to years of physical and sexual abuse that had driven Sophia to study botany and toxicology as methods of self-defense and eventual revenge. Her first murder had been carefully planned and executed using oleander flowers and castor beans that she had cultivated in secret and processed into concentrated toxins that she had administered through her stepfather's favorite bourbon over several weeks. The slow poisoning had appeared to be liver failure brought on by alcoholism, and Sophia had inherited the family property where she had first learned to grow and manipulate deadly plants for criminal purposes. However, her stepfather's death had been investigated by a suspicious detective who had discovered evidence of deliberate poisoning and had connected Sophia to the crime through her extensive botanical knowledge and her obvious motive for revenge. After serving 3 years of her life sentence, Sophia had escaped during a prison transport accident and had disappeared into the underground networks of New Orleans, where she had purchased forged identity documents and credentials that allowed her to establish her new life as a legitimate businesswoman. The success of her identity transformation had convinced Sophia that her criminal past was permanently buried, but she had developed a pathological fear of exposure that drove her to murder anyone who posed threats to her carefully constructed new life. Over the past 5 years, Sophia had murdered 7 clients and business associates who had discovered inconsistencies in her background or had threatened to investigate her credentials and personal history. Her victims had been carefully selected based on their access to information that could expose her true identity, their lack of close family connections who might pursue investigations, and their involvement in situations where their deaths could be attributed to accidents or natural causes. Her victims had included Dr. Patricia Williams, a botanist who had recognized some of Sophia's rare plants as species that were only cultivated in prison botanical programs; Marcus Foster, a private investigator who had been hired by a suspicious client to verify Sophia's credentials; and Jennifer Chen, a background check specialist who had discovered discrepancies in Sophia's educational and employment records that suggested identity fraud. "Sophia, I need to discuss some concerns I have about your business documentation and professional credentials," said Detective Amanda Rodriguez of the New Orleans Police Department's Fraud Division as she entered Bayou Blooms carrying a thick file of investigation materials and a warrant to inspect Sophia's business records. Detective Rodriguez specialized in investigating identity fraud and had developed expertise in tracking criminals who used stolen or forged credentials to establish new lives in different cities or states. Detective Rodriguez's investigation represented an existential threat to Sophia's criminal operation, as her law enforcement expertise and access to criminal databases could definitively expose Sophia's true identity and connect her to multiple unsolved murders. "Of course, Detective Rodriguez," Sophia replied, though she felt the familiar surge of terror and rage that accompanied any official scrutiny of her carefully fabricated identity and credentials. "I'm always willing to cooperate with any investigation, though I must say I'm somewhat confused about what concerns you might have regarding my business practices or professional qualifications." Detective Rodriguez consulted detailed reports from multiple agencies that had been investigating Sophia's background, following suspicious reports from clients and business associates who had noticed inconsistencies in her personal history and professional claims. "Sophia, we've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into your identity and credentials, following reports from several sources who have raised questions about your educational background and work experience," Detective Rodriguez said, with the methodical precision that had made her successful in solving complex fraud cases. "Our investigation has revealed that the Sophia Delacroix identity you've been using for the past 8 years doesn't exist in any official records prior to 2016, when you suddenly appeared in New Orleans with fully documented credentials and business licenses that appear to have been created rather than earned through legitimate channels." The detective's confirmation that law enforcement had identified the timeline of her identity creation and had connected it to forged documentation confirmed Sophia's worst fears that her criminal past was about to be exposed and would result in her return to prison for both her original murder conviction and the additional killings she had committed to protect her secret. Sophia's response was swift and lethal as she realized that eliminating Detective Rodriguez was her only option for maintaining her freedom and protecting the life she had built through systematic deception and murder. Detective Rodriguez, I think there may be some confusion about documentation requirements for foreign-born business owners, Sophia said while discreetly reaching for a prepared spray bottle containing aerosolized ricin that she kept hidden among her flower preservation supplies for use against threats to her security. Perhaps we could examine my credentials more carefully in my private greenhouse where I keep my most sensitive business documentation and botanical specimens. I believe I can provide additional proof of my qualifications and explain any apparent discrepancies in my background records. Detective Rodriguez agreed to examine Sophia's documentation in the greenhouse, not realizing that the florist was leading her into an isolated location where previous murders had been committed and where Sophia planned to kill her using the aerosolized ricin that would cause fatal respiratory failure while appearing to be an allergic reaction to exotic plant pollens. Sophia's plan involved spraying Detective Rodriguez with the ricin solution while she was examining botanical specimens, causing rapid pulmonary edema and respiratory collapse that would be attributed to a severe allergic reaction rather than deliberate poisoning by a convicted killer. But Sophia's carefully planned murder of the detective was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of federal marshals who had been tracking her escaped convict status and had coordinated with local law enforcement to apprehend her. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jennifer Walsh had been leading a federal task force dedicated to tracking escaped convicts who had successfully established new identities and had been living as fugitives for extended periods. Marshal Walsh specialized in long-term fugitive investigations and had developed expertise in identifying escaped prisoners who used sophisticated identity fraud techniques to avoid recapture by law enforcement agencies. The federal investigation had been initiated when Sophia's fingerprints had been inadvertently collected during a routine business license renewal process and had been matched to the escaped convict database through an automated identification system. The discovery had triggered an immediate federal investigation that had been conducted in coordination with local law enforcement to gather evidence and plan Sophia's capture. Marshal Walsh had been conducting surveillance of Sophia's activities and had coordinated with Detective Rodriguez to ensure that Sophia's arrest would occur before she could harm additional victims or attempt to flee New Orleans with another new identity. "Sophia Tran, I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Walsh," she announced as she entered the greenhouse where Sophia was preparing to murder Detective Rodriguez. "You're under arrest for escape from federal custody, identity fraud, and multiple counts of murder committed while you were a fugitive from justice." Sophia's reaction to the federal marshal's intervention was a combination of absolute desperation and explosive violence as she realized that her 8-year flight from justice had finally ended and that law enforcement agencies had coordinated to prevent her planned murder of Detective Rodriguez while building comprehensive cases against her systematic killing spree. "You don't understand what I've built here," Sophia screamed while abandoning her plan to poison Detective Rodriguez and instead attempting to attack both law enforcement officers with garden tools and concentrated plant toxins that she kept readily available for emergency situations. "I created a life of beauty and art from the ashes of abuse and violence. I gave brides the most beautiful weddings they could imagine. I was helping people celebrate love and happiness." Detective Rodriguez and Marshal Walsh looked absolutely stunned as they realized the sophistication of Sophia's criminal operation and the extent to which she had been using her botanical expertise to commit systematic murder while hiding behind the facade of artistic excellence and romantic celebration. The comprehensive investigation that followed Sophia's arrest revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise and the sophisticated methods she had developed to murder clients while using her botanical knowledge to avoid detection. Forensic analysis of Sophia's greenhouse and business facilities revealed extensive evidence of her toxic plant cultivation operations, including stockpiles of processed plant poisons, sophisticated extraction equipment, and detailed research notes documenting the effects of various botanical toxins on human physiology. Her personal records showed systematic coordination between client background investigations and targeted murders designed to eliminate potential threats to her false identity. The investigation also uncovered Sophia's comprehensive identity fraud operation, including connections to criminal networks that specialized in creating false documentation for escaped convicts and other fugitives seeking to establish new lives. Her transformation from Sophia Tran to Sophia Delacroix had required extensive planning and criminal cooperation that had cost over $200,000 and had taken years to implement successfully. Most disturbing was the discovery of Sophia's detailed expansion plans for her criminal operation, including identification of additional targets whose deaths would eliminate potential threats to her security and her development of increasingly sophisticated botanical weapons that would be virtually undetectable in standard autopsy examinations. Sophia Tran was ultimately convicted of escape from federal custody, 7 additional counts of first-degree murder, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit organized criminal activity, and numerous other charges related to her systematic exploitation of client trust and her use of botanical expertise for criminal purposes. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout New Orleans' wedding industry and prompted immediate reforms in vendor licensing, background checking procedures, and client protection protocols. The case became a landmark example of how escaped convicts could successfully establish new identities and commit systematic crimes while hiding behind legitimate business operations and artistic reputations. Several other wedding vendors and service providers were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of the luxury event industry and new requirements for comprehensive background verification that made it more difficult for criminals to exploit wedding services to target wealthy clients. Detective Rodriguez and Marshal Walsh received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in tracking long-term fugitives who used identity fraud to establish criminal enterprises. Their investigation techniques became standard procedures for federal agencies responsible for apprehending escaped convicts and protecting communities from dangerous fugitives. Isabella Blackwood's wedding was postponed while she recovered from the trauma of learning that her trusted florist was an escaped murderer who had been planning to kill her to protect a false identity. The wedding industry implemented comprehensive new safety protocols designed to protect clients from exploitation by vendors with criminal histories. The case prompted comprehensive changes in business licensing regulation, including mandatory fingerprint verification for all service providers, real-time background monitoring for licensed professionals, enhanced cooperation between licensing agencies and law enforcement, and new reporting requirements for suspicious activities involving high-value client services. Sophia's conviction also led to increased awareness among wedding clients about the importance of verifying vendor credentials and conducting independent background research before entrusting service providers with access to personal information and private celebrations. The florist and broader wedding industries implemented revolutionary new safety measures, including enhanced vendor screening procedures, comprehensive client advocacy programs, mandatory reporting of suspicious vendor behaviors, and improved training for recognizing signs of potential criminal activity among service providers. 8 years after Sophia's recapture and return to life imprisonment, New Orleans' wedding industry continued to implement safeguards designed to protect clients from vendors who might abuse their positions of trust and artistic authority for criminal purposes. The florist, who had promised to create beautiful celebrations of love and commitment, had instead used her botanical expertise and artistic reputation to commit systematic murder and identity fraud while hiding from justice as an escaped convict. However, her crimes had been thoroughly exposed, and her victims had found justice through the dedication of investigators who refused to accept coincidental deaths as mere accidents in the wedding industry. Sophia Tran's deadly arrangements had been permanently removed from practice, and their creator returned to life imprisonment, where she would serve multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, proving that even escaped convicts who successfully established new identities could be tracked down and brought to justice when dedicated law enforcement agencies worked together to protect innocent people from sophisticated criminal operations. The florist's deadly arrangements had become her final bouquet of justice, serving as a permanent reminder that criminals cannot escape their past through artistic talent or false identities, and that those who would use beauty to mask murder will ultimately face the full consequences of their betrayal of trust and their flight from justice. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.